In an apocalyptic event like the Freaker outbreak seen in Days Gone, you would expect the military to be front and center, setting up checkpoints, clearing buildings, and disposing of the infected. Yet in-game, we see no presence of the military whatsoever. The closest we have is NERO, and they seem to have drastically failed at containing the outbreak. All the checkpoints and refugee camps we know of were overrun, most within 6 hours of each other. We only encounter NERO in-game when they're on research missions. So what actually happened to NERO and the military/government? First of all, I think it's best to establish exactly who NERO are. NERO, the National Emergency Response Organization, is modelled off the real-life Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. The purpose of FEMA, and as a result NERO, is, like the name suggests, to manage emergencies. This can range anywhere from the local to the national level, and the emergencies could be anything from natural disasters to, in this case, virus outbreaks. So it does sort of make sense why NERO was at the forefront during this outbreak, except for one thing. FEMA doesn't control military resources like soldiers or helicopters. Sure, they can be lent military resources when needed, but they don't own them. So a lot of people assume the NERO soldiers would be regular military personnel, most likely the National Guard, and I guess you would apply the same logic to the helicopters. Yet even in the midst of the outbreak, the helicopters are marked with the NERO insignia, the same with the gear the soldiers wear. Also, in a NERO evacuation notice, the National Guard is stated as having been deployed, but in other documents, the NERO soldiers are referred to as NERO personnel. Most damning would be the recording that details how a NERO checkpoint encountered the Deschutes County militia and mistook them for National Guard, indicating that, at least when NERO was still attempting to maintain control of the country, their soldiers weren't typical military personnel. Which is strange, because that means a disaster relief agency had their own armed soldiers. We'll come back to this. Now let's look at what happened to the military and the rest of the government. We know that the National Guard was actually deployed in areas of Farewell, although this location is only seen in flashbacks. Considering NERO's capabilities and responsibilities, it's likely that the National Guard was responsible for putting down infected in urban areas while NERO held checkpoints and refugee centers. These MRAPs seen at the start of the game probably belonged to the National Guard. So the reason there's no presence of the military in Days Gone, at least from 2 years ago, is because they would have been deployed in more populated areas like Farewell. There may have been small amounts deployed around the rural areas where Days Gone actually takes place. However, they're most likely all evacuated before they were killed. Over 90% of the bodies of NERO personnel we find from 2 years ago are located at outposts that they tried to defend. The military didn't seem to have any outposts, as NERO was handling that. So the military wouldn't have set locations to defend around that area. Now, what about the government, the top, all the way to the president? There's not a lot of knowledge we have. The only thing we can really go off is a quote from Iron Mike saying that everything east of the Mississippi turned to ash in 2 days. We can assume he's talking about 2 days after the initial outbreak. So this means that Washington DC would be completely overrun. It's unknown whether the president is alive, but basically all government would destabilize, as most of it's based in DC. But if we look at Days Gone's world 2 years later, Nero is still there. From one recording, we can assume that some higher management of Nero was in Portland during the outbreak. Although there are rumours that Portland was nuked, the NERO personnel most likely would have had enough warning to get out in time, if that is true. Either way, NERO could potentially be the highest level of government left. And while Copeland thinks that everyone wearing a uniform worth a damn, meaning first responders and the military, died during the outbreak, he isn't the most sane person. It could still mean that most of the military units deployed in Oregon ended up being killed. So after NERO started being overrun, the remaining military personnel would most likely have been absorbed by what was left of NERO. During the events of Days Gone, NERO makes use of helicopters as their method of transport. While the helicopters could take you as far as Salt Lake City from Crater Lake, the constant reappearance of them in Days Gone indicates they must have a base nearby. And it just so happens that there's an Air National Guard base 50 miles away from Crater Lake, the Kingsley Field Air National Guard base. If NERO is the highest level of remaining government, there's probably other surviving bases around the country, but this one may well be the last in Oregon. Hopefully I could give you an idea of what happened to NERO, the government, and the military in Days Gone. And even if I didn't, I hope you still enjoyed.